Welcome to our Q&A this evening as part of our Represent series of lectures. We're really happy today to be joined by two ex-Wolverhampton students, Daniel Williams and Reece McKenzie, who recently performed the show Do You Get Your Hair Permed at the Arena Theatre. And Reece and Dan are going to talk a little bit tonight about Black representation in musical theatre. Just before we start, a few little bits and pieces. We are being recorded this evening, so please don't give us any personal details either in the chat or when you're talking. If you want to ask any questions, then you can do so using the Q&A function at the very bottom of the screen. And that would be great to have plenty of questions tonight, so that Reece and Dan can talk around the things that you're interested in knowing. I wonder if you could just, Reece and Dan, I wonder if you could just say a little bit about yourselves, your background in musical theatre, that sort of thing, and how you came to do the show that many of us saw last week. So let's start with Reece.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Q&A. Some of you might know, as given in the introduction to this Q&A, I put on a show. Me and Daniel put on a show. Well, Do You Get Your Hair Permed? It all started out working from the earliest point backwards, from a dissertation piece I had to put together for my master's in musical theatre performance, which I am still currently finishing up in London. It was a project that was put together with my supervisor, Scott Harrison. And it came about through some odd means. But first, my background in musical theatre, I studied my undergraduate at Wolverhampton University in drama musical theatre. Since then, I have studied an intensive diploma in musical theatre performance, and I'm finishing up my master's in musical theatre performance. Before then, I studied performing arts in sixth form. And before that, I've been part of numerous choirs. And I grew up singing and listening to MTV with my mum in the morning while getting ready for school. As far as the background for the show goes, it started off a little different to how it ended. I wanted to explore and look at the expectations of the Black male voice. For anyone who doesn't understand what I mean by that, what I mean to say is, as an ethnic performer, there is a specific level of expectation placed on you in terms of your physical capability, your personality, and the sort of repertoire that you can bring forward. What I mean when I say repertoire is, most of you will know by now, the kind of songs that you sing, the genres, as well as the vocal ranges and such. I became very aware during my studies at university and my studies since university that in order to be successful in this industry, you don't only have to work hard in your general life, but you have to be versatile. And so I had to pick up gospel singing, R&B singing, contemporary music, legit. I had to learn how to sing operatically and support my voice and use my body in ways that I had, up until that point, never realized how vital that some of this stuff was, not just in terms of emotional connection and the mental art of going into a show and going into performance, but the physical demand that is on a singer. You normally think of performance as something that really has a high demand in terms of acting quality or danceability, but to sing and perform to a level really that you would want to rival performers in the West End, you have to have a connection to your body that kind of is that of an athlete.
Thanks, Reece. That's great. Dan, do you want to say a little bit about your experience in musical theatre and your experience as a student and that sort of thing, and how you got involved in the show?
Of course. So I started off from more of a music background. I started playing when I was young, and then I started playing in church as well. And then I did a level 3 diploma in musical theatre when I in college, and then I went on to do my undergrad in musical theatre at Wolves, and then I started a postgrad at Wolves as well. And then in terms of getting involved in this project, this was something that Reece said that he was working on, and he said, I need someone to play for me, I need some support. And I said, I'd love to do it. So I just said I'll jump on board. And once again, his repertoire was really nice because, as I said, I started playing back in church, and some of the songs was very church, had that church element in it. So I absolutely enjoyed playing for him. I played for Reece before as well, back when I was doing when I started my postgrad, and so we had that connection already as well. So it was once again, we was able to we could be really honest with each other. We could really be able to just get to grips with the pieces. We could just say, well, I don't like that, let's trade that, let's change that. And yeah, once again, I absolutely loved working on the project.
Thanks, Dan. Just to remind everybody, if you do want to ask any specific questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we come to those as we're going through today. So let's think a little bit more about the project, the research project that went around the recital that hopefully all of us have now seen. What was this kind of starting point for the research? So you've talked a little bit about looking at the Black voice and the embodiment of the voice and that sort of thing. Where did you start in terms of thinking about repertoire and about what sort of things you wanted to put together in the show?
The starting point for me was really taking a real hard look at the magnifying glass and thinking, in all the years that I've trained and in all the years I've been singing, what kind of music do I sing? What kind of repertoire do I actually have? Because you go through university, you go through education, especially in this sort of realm, and you go, okay, I've been asked for a 1920s song today, or I've been asked for an upbeat gospel song today, or an upbeat musical theatre song, or I need a contemporary for today. But I had a real hard look back, and I said, from all the stuff and all the songs that I've ever sung, how many of them are still in my ability? How many of them would I regularly sing while I was doing the dishes? And I came to find I had a really narrow field of genres that I felt really attached to. And from all the stuff I'd learned, and from all the stuff I'd picked up and scratched over, I realized I really wasn't making the best use I could of all the little things and little tidbits I'd picked up along the way. And so what I did was I decided I wanted to have something from as many genres as I thought I could touch vocally at the moment. I wanted something legit sounding. I wanted things from earlier in the years of musical theatre. I wanted stuff that could connect to musical theatre without being from theatre. So I wanted music that existed outside of musical theatre. But then at the same time, at the very beginning, when I had my first initial meeting with my supervisor, I said, I want to look at how the voice is expressed on and off stage. And Scott was confused when I mentioned that. He said, what do you mean? And I said, well, the way in which I have to use my voice on stage, you could easily, well, absolutely not easily, I take that back, very difficultly, in a very difficult way, akin that to the idea of using your voice in everyday life and in situations that we find hard to deal with. And I said that I'm at a point in my life where I don't know where I stand in the world. Like, scratch out musical theatre for a second. I don't know as a person where I stand in the world. I'm not incredibly sure who I am. And I said, one of the places I wanted to start with that was, what does it mean to me to be Black? And what does it mean to me to have a voice in the Black community? And do I want a voice in the Black community? And me and Scott bounced ideas off of each other. I said, oh, I want to look at tonality. I want to look at voice. I want to look at pitching. I want to look at vocal ranges and expectations upon vocal ranges. And he turned around halfway through with all my incessant ramblings and said, one thing you've said to me that's really interesting, Reece, which you actually haven't said to me at all during this entire talk, but you mentioned right at the beginning, was you said your title was to be the expectations of the Black male voice. Not the expectations of Black male singing, not the expectations of Black performance, but Black voice. And that's when you turned and said, you've made a great effort to make this sound like you want to know more about yourself as a person, and you want to keep it really internal, and you want to know more about music and how you can further express your ability to perform and how you can increase your genres and repertoire, and you want to show the world what it takes to do something like that in this industry. And he stopped and he said, "You sound a lot like an activist." And I slammed the brakes right there and then, and I went red in the face and I said, "But Scott, I don't want to be an activist." And that was the real starting point, because Scott turned to me and he said, "Well, why the hell not? Why would you want to limit yourself and limit the things that you can do?" And he said, if you want to look at this and you want to open the door, it's got to be wide open, Reece. You can't peek through the keyhole. You can't just take a slight look and go, "Oh, well, these are the parcels and pieces I want to look at." You don't just, it's not like going into a laundry bag and saying, "Oh, I'm going to do the whites. I'm going to do the whites. So there, I'm going to do my colors, or I'm going to do my socks or my underwear." If you're going to do the washing, you got to be ready to do the entire washing, start to finish. And so that's when thinking began. And I put it to one side and I carried on doing my research. I carried on looking at things. I began to try and structure my written portion. In fact, I have some notes here. I wanted to structure it in terms of genres and such. And then it ended up being, I wanted to start with talking about spirituals, because spirituals, for anyone who's watched the show definitely knows, because I included the definition in the show. Spirituals are the connection that we have between slave songs and gospel music, for the most part. And I couldn't possibly think, "Oh, well, how can I explore my origins as a Black person without exploring, and especially in music, without exploring the origins of music for the Black community?" I wanted to look at lyrics specifically. And that was an odd one, because a lot of performers can go through their entire career without thinking there's anything important in lyrics. As long as they feel something when they sing a song, they don't need to say, "Oh, well, this word makes me think of this color, or this word makes me think of this scene, or this flower, this specific moment in my life." But what's very important, and an incredibly important aspect of Black music, especially music created by Black artists and music of Black culture, is that the words can be so crucial to understanding what the artist is talking about. Because most people, especially in the community, especially in the Black community, write their songs from lived experience, Black experience. And for you to just sit there and go, "Oh, do you know what? This is a really nice beat. Oh, I like this melody. Oh, I like what they've done there with the song. I like what they've done here with the song." And you completely ignore the lyrics, well, you've missed half the journey. Next, I thought I'll look into speeches, because if I'm looking at the Black male voice, I need to know just as much about speaking on stage as I do about singing on stage. So I watched videos of Martin Luther King Jr. I looked at Malcolm X. I stumbled upon an activist by the name of James Baldwin. For anyone who doesn't know, there's a great video on YouTube. It's about an hour long, but it's definitely worth a watch. It was James Baldwin and another man who in 1965 had a debate, and it was about whether or not the American dream was achieved at the expense of the Black community. And to see that man speak was incredibly interesting. He spent at least 20 minutes talking during this, and everything he said was impassioned. He took his time, he picked his words incredibly carefully. The one thing that struck me most about the debate was, as he finished, this entire crowded room, which was about 97% white men, all stood up and gave him a huge round of applause. And as he sat down and he looked up and saw all these people standing and clapping, he looked afraid. He cracked a smile, but he looked afraid. He had to remind himself where he was. And he had to take a second to remind himself that it was adoration that he was seeing and not a sign of threat. The next thing I wanted to look at was rights, the civil rights movement, hair, the Black Lives Matter movement. I wanted to look at, this is something interesting. I wanted to look at behavior control. And this is something some people will have grown up knowing exactly what I'm talking about, just as I say behavior control, and others will be a little confused. And I decided on that chapter during a work shift with one of my colleagues. We were having a conversation, and it struck me that he'd mentioned that, because we're both mixed race, he mentioned to me that the idea of walking around on the street feels very interesting to him, especially because of his hairstyle, because of the way he wears his clothes, and because of the kind of clothes he wears. He says more often than not, even in London, he has had people walk faster than him, cross the road from him, simply because he appears to be threatening. And I've worked with this guy, and he is happy-go-lucky. He's got a charm to him. He's got a stride in his step. He's fun to talk to. He's got banter. And I could never imagine standing next to him that he'd look the scarier out of the two of us. And so I wanted to look at a chapter of how being a Black male in a community where there has been years and decades of stereotypes about Black men out there, what's then the presentation and representation we use out in the streets to make sure that people don't perceive us as a threat, and how it feels to know that you have to worry about being perceived as a threat, regardless of who you are as a person. What's next? I think, yeah, one of the last things I wanted to look at in the beginning was Black mental health, which came out somewhat in the final product, but was more about myself than about the wider scope of Black mental health. But it was mainly related to my dad. Now, I'm not going to go into huge details about childhood and people growing up and things like that, but people grow up very differently, and it can show in the way that they carry themselves through their lives. And my dad grew up in a very harsh environment. My dad grew up where it was fight or flight a lot of the time. And so I know my dad's been through a lot, and I found out when I was younger, or at least I found out when I was younger that my dad started reading books on mental health, and he may or may not have had a therapist at one point, or a counselor. And to this day, I've never sat down and I've never asked him about it. We've never spoke about it, because it's not something that you do in the generation that my dad grew up in. You don't sit down as men and talk about your feelings. You don't share stuff like that because you can appear weak. And so I wanted to look at mental health for the simple fact that you could get all the help you want in the world, but if you then can't turn around and be your best self afterwards because you feel like you have to have a certain appearance in front of other people, then you've missed out on getting the results you wanted from the help you've asked for. And that's sort of the beginnings of the process itself for the show. Well, the research towards the show.
Thanks, Reece. That's really interesting. And one of the things that people will notice is that there's a lot of things that cross over. In this module that we teach at Wolverhampton, we tend to look at different parts of identity and isolation, but actually nobody is ever just one identity. Nobody is ever just gay or just Black or whatever it might be. There's all sorts of other things that might link into that. And so it's really important when we're doing research and when we're doing work, we make sure that we are really specific about what we're looking at. Dan, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to bring in there in terms of your experience, because you're a writer and a composer as well as MD and as well as a performer. And I'm really interested, particularly perhaps going back on the thing that Reece said about lyrics and how you choose words and that kind of thing. But I wondered if there's anything you could talk about there that might be interesting for our students.
Well, yeah, a lot of the time, because as we said, a lot of that gospel feeling, that gospel sound of music that he used a lot in the show, came back from obviously slave times, and then slaves used that in order to integrate with society. But in terms of my experience, that gospel music, that gospel sound is something we grew up with because that was our link back home, because obviously my parents came, well, my grandparents came over from Jamaica, and they, for instance, they came to England, they lived in Warsaw, not far from Wednesbury, and they were the only black family, and they would go to workplaces, and they would go to work and work in all white environments, and their only bit of culture, their only bit of home would be back at church. So all of those sounds, I personally feel like I've inherited them. So then when I'm picking sounds and I'm picking lyrics as well, I always think back to those kinds of things, that kind of heritage, and try to pull some of it back. And then I use things, poets like Maya Angelou, things like that, where I look at their lyrics and look at their sound and look at what they put together. People like Nina Simone as well. And then more modern ones, people, Jill, I don't know if you guys know Jill Scott. I use a lot of her sounds, a lot of Mary J. Blige, Stevie Wonder. His music is absolutely stunning, and his vocal range is incredible. So I use a lot of that, but also as well, as because Reece was talking about, basically trying to appropriate what you're doing, because I do find myself pulling back sometimes, because I think to myself, is that too much? Or is this going to be something that's going to be generic enough for the entire audience to be able to understand, or do I need to sort of pull it back just a little bit in order to make it a bit more universal? And I'm not sure whether that's right or that's wrong, but it's just part of the process that I go through when I'm thinking and creating.
Thanks, Dan. Sorry, I have a visitor. You may have noticed I now have a cat with me as well. Hester decided to join this evening. I mean, that's a really interesting question when you're talking about inspirations there. And maybe that's something I'd like to ask Reece about as well, is who really inspires you? I think with both of those things you've talked about, as a performer, but also as somebody that, because it's one of these things, when we use the word activist, I think any of us that find ourselves in minority position, we often find that we are being an activist just by the fact that we are in a space that people are not used to seeing us in. Certainly as a teacher, I found that happens. As a gay man in teaching, that happens with me. So I'm interested in who, you mentioned James Baldwin a little bit there, but I'm interested in who your influences are, both in performing and in your kind of other work, your voice outside of performing as well.
It's an interesting question, because because of the way I grew up, I try to always never be too mainstream. So I don't really try to follow many big names. There are lots of people I've been told to look at and things I do look at, but I try to always utilize things closest to me. So I take a lot of inspiration from people I know. I take a lot of understanding from the things I've learned about my father. Whether or not I take a lot of, how do I say this? So what I mean to say is, you don't always have to find inspiration in the things you admire about what people do. You can always find inspiration in people, regardless of the way they behave, whether it's saying, oh, I like the way a certain individual does that, how they carry themselves, or I know I don't want to look the way that person looks to me right now. So what can I do to better myself in that direction? And to that same end, one of the reasons I asked Daniel to do this project with me and do this show with me was because when I first started out at University of Wolverhampton, I did take a lot of inspiration from Daniel, because I knew Daniel's name weeks and weeks and weeks before I ever got to see him in the flesh, simply because I heard so much about him, and I couldn't wait to meet this person that I'd heard in such admiration. In terms of life, I take a lot of inspiration from my mum. My mum's had to live quite a difficult life. She used to do a lot. My mum used to work night shifts while she was studying at university, so she managed to get an entire business degree while raising 2 kids and working night shifts at the same time. And I've tried to follow the same direction. My mum will never let me work as hard as she works, because she cares too much, because I'm the youngest son. But I take a lot of drive from the idea that if you want something bad enough, the only person that could ever stop you achieving it is yourself. On that same vine, I take a lot of inspiration from my nan. Bless her heart and soul. At the moment, she's not doing too great. but she was one of the people that I grew up around, especially when I was younger, that never made me feel out of place. Because we'd go to hers for Sunday dinner, and my nan's straight from Jamaica. Beautiful woman, beautiful heart. She goes to church every Sunday. She used to cook roast dinner every Sunday, and some days it would be a proper roast dinner, like a traditional roast dinner, and other days it would be a tender, fall off the bone Dutch pot jerk chicken. You'd have the mashed potatoes and the rice and peas and the coleslaw. Everything would be ready. Everything would be ready. And I know most people don't have rice and coleslaw with their roast dinners, and they think that's strange. But anything my nan would put on a plate in front of me, I would eat. There would be nothing stopping me. But she raised 6 kids more or less by herself on an estate that didn't provide the best space for her kids to grow up, and in an estate that didn't provide the best cultural diversity. She is up at the crack of dawn doing things that you wouldn't expect anyone to do all in one day. She's a gardener, she's a therapist, she's a keeper, she's a listener. And just a moment ago, I mentioned that she was one of the people that never made me feel like I was out of place. What I mean when I said that was, I have 2 sides to my family. My mom's side is Indian, and my dad's side is Jamaican. Except out of everyone in my wider family, I'm one of the only mixed race kids. So to sit at a table with all my Jamaican relatives used to be really scary for me, and I used to stick by my mom really tight, because I could look at my mom and I could immediately see that we were the same, we were similar, and I felt safe. But going to my nan's for roast dinner, I didn't always talk, but there was always laughter to be had, there was always enjoyment to be had, and my nan would always check on me and she'd make sure I was comfortable. And she used to tell my mum that we were gorgeous when we were babies, and she always loved us and stuff. And she'd do things like, she'd always have hard candy. And you think, oh, well, Nan's always have hard candy, but she'd always be pushing that hard candy at me as hard as she could. She'd have ice cream, she'd make her own jelly, she'd have ice cream cones so you could make us fresh cones. And every so often, especially when I got a little bit older, we'd have Christmases there where we all brought our presents in and we'd share our presents out and open them together. And my nan would always sneak me and my cousin just a little bit of Baileys. She wouldn't tell no one, and she'd be like, shh. And obviously, it wasn't a huge secret because you'd see us there giggling to ourselves and stuff. So it wasn't like this huge secret, but she'd play it up like it was the most like top secret Asian thing in the entire world. And growing up in life, you don't always appreciate little things like that. But my nan was always about doing stuff like that for people. And in terms of on stage, obsessed with Leslie Odom Jr. I think if I get his name right, as a performer who I've followed slightly in terms of the songs and styles that I perform. I think his name is, if I just search it really quickly. No, that's not his name. I'll come back to it in a second. But he was the original Benny in in the Heights. And he was George Washington, Hamilton. And I take inspiration from him in terms of his ability and transferability. And the fact that I've seen him in TV programs as well as on stage. He plays one of the side characters in Suits, which not many people would notice unless you know his face, which I think is incredibly interesting. Because I don't want to be the same way that I don't want to be pigeonholed and categorized in my life because of the color of my skin. I would absolutely hate and dread to be pigeonholed and categorized in the industry and be only able to do music theatre jobs or only able to do stage jobs and never get to do film or television or advertisement. Yes, absolutely right, sorry. So the person who I was talking about a second ago is Christopher Jackson. And I remembered the last name, but I didn't want to say the name unless I was absolutely sure I knew the first name as well. So thank you for that, James. Just gave the game away. There's no secrets here. There are no secrets here. But yeah. And the whole pigeonhole idea brings me to a question I get asked, and I have been asked a lot more in the last 2 years, and especially a lot this year, is what do you want to do, and where do you want to go, and how far do you want to take this? And people will say, oh, like, what is the end goal? What is the goal for now? Do you want to get into the West End? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And well, I didn't always say, but I've become accustomed to saying now, that if I could possibly sit there and give you an accurate list of all the things that I want to do and want to have done, I wouldn't be giving myself enough credit for all the things that I think I could be capable of doing. But people will say, oh, you can dream and you can do stuff like that. I would never want to, for a second, place an expectation on myself, because as soon as I do that, I've got nothing left to do but break that expectation.
Thanks, Reece. Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for that, and thank you for being so open with all those things as well. It does occur to me, thinking about particularly, not that there's loads of these, but musicals where the writing team are Black, where the creative team are Black, is that most of those musicals are set in family communities. And that family is something that clearly is very important. And also that thing that you mentioned about the idea about being mixed race, and I know that's true of a number of my students as well, and how I think it's written about in Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Lodge, but also in other, other books as well, is the thing about how difficult it is to be mixed race, because sometimes it's very difficult to find that you fit in even with your parents, and so I think that's a really important thing to bring up as well, and something that perhaps white people like myself would never have thought about, if somebody hadn't said it to us. Dan, I'm really interested in kind of how, again, I suppose partly with your writing, but also in terms of the thing that Reece mentioned about you being an inspiration to Reece when he started at university. Because one of the things I'm always very aware of is that in academia, particularly in education, that quite often you'll come to a university and that university doesn't feel like a Black space. Or a space even that is particularly welcoming to Black people. And I was wondering if that was something that you might be able to talk a little bit around, and how, when you go into new situations, how that works for you, and if there are spaces that you've found that you feel really comfortable in.
Yeah, I would say, because if you know me, I'm quite out there. I can be quite fun. I can be quite loud. But if you used to meet me the first time, I'm very quiet. And basically all I'm doing is how far I can go and how far I can be myself in that situation. Now, the University of Wolverhampton has been very good to me in terms of being able to be an open space, to be able to be creative. They've always thrown things my way. So in terms of being open to me being able to express it, and I'll always be thankful for that. But sometimes in theatre, I even do it myself, actually, where you kind of think to yourself, oh, well, that's a Black activity and that shouldn't be in the theatre. A lady of a similar same race as me. I'm guessing she was from the Caribbean descent, but that's just me guessing. And we're watching the show, and then someone said something, and then she shouted out in the middle of the audience, "Well, come on then, say it then." Almost like that give and response, call and response kind of thing. And now that's very much prevalent in Caribbean theatre when they do their comedy plays. It's that fourth wall is gone. And honestly, and I don't know if you've ever been, there's almost an electric nature of a Black audience, and I can't explain it, but it's almost just so alive when you're there on stage and there's Black audience, and I can't explain it. But I found myself to this person thinking, the whole of my posture changed. I went totally straight up, and I was almost like, we don't do that here. And I found myself doing it, and I was like, no, because this is a space for everyone. And if that's how you enjoy theatre, that's how you should be able to enjoy theatre. And who am I to tell you, no, we don't do that in here. This is a theatre. So who am I to do that? but we should have more open, and we should make it more of a safe space for people to come and more people to enjoy the theatre. And I personally feel that there is a space for it, there is an audience for it, but we should, as I said, the university in itself is open to it, but we should also allow people to enjoy the theatre as well and enjoy it in the way that they would enjoy it. If that answers your question, James.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, and it's something that we look at for those people who are students at the university. We look at level 6. We look at audience theory and how audiences respond in different ways to theatre or to performance, and I think that's something that's really important as well. And it's certainly something that I've coming from quite a conservative middle class white background, that I have to work with as well. It's this, things need to change about how people are able to access theatre. I was going to ask actually if there are any specific musicals that have inspired you, particularly musicals perhaps with Black characters in, as you've gone through. Is there anything particular that you've really kind of enjoyed seeing on stage that's made you feel represented, or you at least in terms of race feel more represented?
The Wiz is one of them, and the Wiz is one, the Dreamgirls once again, and the Color Purple as well. And the reason why I say these is because once again they feel inherently Black. And the reason why I say the Color Purple is because if you look, I've watched a lot of the recordings from Broadway, and really over the stage, things like when Prince died and then they did a whole number at the end, or when Heather Hadley left and they did a whole number at the end, and it was almost like they took over the space and it was theirs, and that made me so happy. It really did. It's this idea of throwing away the book for a little bit and say, right, we know the music, we know this piece, let's just do it, let's perform it, and just embodying the piece. And that's why I love those pieces. That's why. And it's more than just to riff as much as you want. It was really just Black, and I just loved it.
Reece, have you got anything?
Sorry, I wasn't unmuted. Well, first of all, listening to that, if anyone could see me, I was clapping, I was clicking, just throwing my hands around, I was laughing, because I absolutely agree. There's something about, especially lately, I really love seeing people enjoy themselves as themselves. And I can understand a lot of the comments that Dan's made, because I went to go see a performance on Top of the Stag in London very recently. It was called Pleasure Garden, a really new piece written by a fabulous writer who I've actually seen serving pints at a pub. I will not name the pub. And they're absolutely adorable. And the show was fantastic to watch. But I noticed that as I was sat there, it wasn't the fact that I felt really outside to be an audience member in it. It was the first time I'd watched a show in a theatre in way too long, and it was the first time I'd got to have a proper break and sit down and watch someone else perform face to face. And it was the fact that I couldn't control my responses. I was sat there and something would happen, I'd be like, gasp, or something would happen, I'd be like, raw, and I'd be doing gun fingers, I'd be clicking all over the spot, and I was getting like, and I have some friends with me, and they were like, yo, put your hand down, man, calm down, relax, and I was like, ooh, it made me feel a kind of way, and I reflected on it, and I was like, but I used to feel exactly the same way if I was sitting watching a show. I didn't want anyone to talk because I didn't want to miss anything. But it can really be related to the idea that if you're going to put on a show, you got to expect, if you're not having wild outbursts and visceral reactions like that, not ones that are like hecklers, but if you aren't having physical and like verbal reactions to shows, sometimes you don't know if you're doing right. if you're doing it right or you're getting it right. Because some shows, sometimes, and especially in tradition, you expect people to sit there and they'll clap when it's time to clap, and they'll listen when it's time to listen, they'll cheer when it's time to cheer. But I enjoy the fact that musical theatre is coming towards more of a fourth wall's broken, let's enjoy ourselves, and if you can feel the vibe, then the vibe is there. Because the whole point of musical theatre is either to reflect reflect the reality that we are living in, or to aspire change. And I think it's a change that we need. If you can't express yourself that way in a theatre and express yourself that way in a show, how are you supposed to express yourself that way in real life? How are you supposed to feel free to be your best and your truest self in real life if you can't even sit there in a theatre and cheer when someone gets kicked in the face, or someone hits a high note, or someone does something completely unexpected? Like, even when actors and performers make mistakes on stage, the way people recover from stuff like that, it is elegant, it is swift, and and even if they might be embarrassed by the fact you've noticed, it's worth noting, because if I've messed up a line, or I've seen someone mess up a line and I've scooped in there and covered it up and it was unbelievable, and I feel like the sweat dripping down my forehead because I've just had to do something completely off script, there's something inspirational by that urgency and by that spontaneity and by going completely off script. But then at the same time, I know it's the same as Daniel. I've done the exact same thing. I did a performance of Hair at the end of my master's, and my mom came to watch it. Bless her heart, she was late and I was furious. She missed my solo song and I was dreadfully upset and all this other stuff. And in Hair, it's like really immersive, and it was such an odd show to do so close to coming out of a lockdown and coming and like during the time that we're in. And it was time for the second act. And so everyone strolls on stage and we do a little bit and we interact with each other before the act starts. And I walk on stage and I'm strolling, enjoying myself, and I'm in character, I'm in the flow, and everything's great. And I hear my mom start shouting my name at me. She goes, "Oh my God, it's Reece! Oh, Reece, come here, Reece." And she suddenly notices that it's not me coming out to say hi, it's me coming out to start the show. And she goes, "Oh," and I see her sat there, she got a hand over her mouth, and I'm like, I mean, at the time I was like, Mom, you're embarrassing me. But then I sat there and I'm like, but why not? Why not enjoy yourself? Like, sure, it was a wild outburst, but she found out what she was doing, but she was just doing her, like she hadn't seen me in ages. She was just feeling herself and she was in the moment. And that's what performance is about. It's about being there and being present. And I can't fault her for being there and being present. Because who would I be as a performer to fault someone for doing the exact same thing I want to make a living out of?
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Reece. That's really lovely. We've got a few questions coming in, so I'm going to ask those questions and see how we get on with those. So the first one is, do you have any advice for aspiring performers, and how do you stay motivated when you're facing as much rejection as one does in musical theatre? Nice and cheerful.
Well, the idea of the rejection side and how do you stay motivated, I've asked people this question, and I've been spoken to about this in lectures, I've been spoken to about this by people in the industry, and it's one of those things. And I've even had to talk to my own friends about it who are trying to get up and get in the industry now, who are having to deal with that kind of thing. And I've had to deal with it as well. I've had to deal with it for reasons even outside my race, and it's a real knockback when you think that you can be rejected for something other than what you expect to get rejected for and what you expect to get denied for. But I like to always think about the idea that if something's passed me by or something hasn't come my way, it's because it wasn't meant for me. And if it was meant for someone else, then that's fine. I will fight to the grit and teeth for it. But if I didn't get it and I gave it my best shot, then there was nothing else I could do. And, even if I didn't sign my name on the wall, my sweat is left on that floor, then I've left my mark. Even if I don't get a job, you can leave a good impression at an audition and it can lead to other things. For example, I got asked to do a job that I ended up having to turn down because of schedule issues, but it came about because I got a link through someone else that I knew who knew me as a performer, and it turned out this person that was offering the job also knew me, but because I was in Godspell at the Rose and Crown Theatre, and because they had some friends who were in that show and they'd spoken about it, my advice would be always give yourself the time to feel disheartened, because you're allowed to be upset about things. You're allowed to have that moment to go, oh well, I didn't get that, and that's sad because it was important to me. But understand that the longer you stay sad and the longer you sit in there, the more things you're going to miss, but for different reasons. And so if you don't want to miss it next time and you want to get the spot next time, you've got to make sure you get back up.
I'd agree. I'd say, and once again, it's a numbers game as well. I know it sounds cold, but you've just got to see it as you're doing this one right, next one, and you'll find the ones that come through. And on top of that, just be diverse as well, and look at your skills that you have to be able to say, right, this is my skill. So it might not be exactly what I want to do, but I can still make some money here, I can make some money there, and then to edge off it. So then you can really do some passion projects. Like for instance, I wouldn't say that I was a rehearsal pianist or a pianist in terms of playing for people, but it's a skill that I have. And so when I was approached by Reece, could you do this for me? So all right, then I'll do it because I've got the skills in order to do it. But I wouldn't say that that's my thing that I'm aiming for, but it's part of my repertoire and part of this. It's part of being diverse. And just like how Reece was saying, a lot of these Black performers are diverse, and that's how our having to be better than everyone else has come out. It's you've got to be able to be doing this, doing that. The amount of times I see Black musicians or Black performer or something, and I say to myself, wow, if this person wasn't a Black performer and they did that, they would just do that all day. But the Black performer has to do that all day, but then they then can do this, and they also can do this, and they also can tap dance, and then they also can play the piano, and they're going to do it all at once. So just be diverse, look at your skills, hone your skills, and try and find your way through, and just say, right, I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna do a bit of this, and you'll see yourself through, man.
Thank you both for that. That's great. Another question here is somebody from the original cast of Hamilton said that although the rise of colorblind casting in musical theatre is good, it's still not enough in terms of having proper representation until there are characters written specifically with people of color in mind. Do you have any thoughts on this? It's quite a big one, that one.
Dan, do you want to go first?
I'm just trying to think, because there was something I saw last year, and I remember thinking to myself, this is a Black person. Like, it wasn't just a person playing a character. It was, do you know, sometimes when you said, this is a Black person, this person has it, because sometimes you say to yourself, okay, then this character, there's certain struggles and there's certain things that this person's not bringing through, and then I can't remember what it was for the life of me, but I remember sitting going, yes, man, this is a Black person. And I think it's true, the idea of colorblind casting, forget about colorblind casting, in the same way when they was talking about, I don't know if you guys have seen Bridgerton, they're saying, I am a Black person, it's not colorblind, I am actually a character who's playing, I'm a Black person playing, and I'm fully aware of my place in society and how that affects the situation around me, the conflict that brings. So it shouldn't be so much colorblind, although the colorblind casting is the way is moving forward. It shouldn't just be colorblind casting. We need to talk about, okay, I am the Black person. So the idea of, for instance, as Reece brought up, walking down the road and saying to someone, would you like some help? And then the person going, no, I don't want no help from you. Little things like that, and those little nuances that it is to be a brown person is what we need. It's what we need.
My opinion on stuff like that tends to be, for me, it's not so much the idea of colorblind casting. I don't mind the fact that there are certain roles that have to be done by specific people or people of specific color. I just think it's important that if that is the case, it's to be respected. Unless you can find a way of casting it with other things in mind. For example, when I did hair, I was the character Wolf. And I wasn't the character Wolf because, oh, there wasn't enough boys. I wasn't the character Wolf because I was Black. I was the character Wolf because my personality and my style and my way of doing things and some of the talents I had for specific genres and my vocal range, it couldn't have been anybody else. And I love stuff like that. So for me, it's more about, it's more about person who's right for the job getting the job. But being conscious that if you've decided to undertake a certain show and you decided to cast a certain show, that you do it with the color consciousness in mind, is the way I'd put it. In fact, on the line of that, when we're talking about color blindness, I want to recommend one of the books that I looked at during my master's and doing my dissertation. The book called White Supremacy and Me. And at least I think it's this book. It should hopefully be this book. But there's a section in it about color blindness, but specifically color blindness out in the world. I think that the term gets confused quite a lot, and I like the way it's being done in the industry. But color blindness, in terms of being out in the world, the book makes a good argument of how when people say that they don't see color and they're colorblind, what they're really doing is ignoring the issue rather than trying to prevent an issue. Which is why I say it's better to be color conscious. And I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in any way, shape, or form, because I consider myself a novice in several areas. I mean, I would still consider myself learning with everything I do, because you never want to stop learning things, because if you stop learning, then it's not because you've excelled in a way that you can't possibly proceed any further. It's because you're not looking hard enough to get better. But it's the idea that if you were to have rubbish in your room and your mom said clean it up, and what you did was you kicked it under your bed, what you haven't done is you haven't cleaned your room by getting rid of the mess. What you've done is created a problem that's going to come back later on. If that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you, Reece, for that. We've got a few more questions here. I think this question here, I think I've tried to get it so it's been answered as we go through. But the question about how a white person might write a story about Black people and their issues, and thinking about, is that something, where does that fit in anywhere? Because we've talked a lot, we've been talking about a lot of things that are very particular to you as Black people, and I think perhaps that's slightly answered the question already, in terms of the fact that a lot of things that you've been talking about today are things that as white people we would not know about, and that was going to change the way that we write about race if we're writing outside. But do you have any thoughts on that at all?
I personally feel it can be done. It just depends on how would you have brown people in the room, because you would always expect to have them in the same way. I would never expect to make a meal for a vegetarian person or a vegan person and I'm not vegan. Just going to make the assumption that they just don't eat this, that, and I'm going to put it in front of them and they're going to eat it. So, well, I would speak to them. I'd say, what do you eat? What don't you eat? What is it? You would want them in the room, and they've got to be part of that creative because once again, it's their lived experience, and there'll be little things that you don't know. In the same way, I would never presume to write anything about a mixed race person's life, because I ain't mixed race, so I don't know what it's like. I know what it's like a Black person. I don't know what it's like to be mixed race and to be caught in between the mid. Can sort of assume, but I just don't know.
Do you want to add anything, Reece? Or
for me personally, I'd love to see it. I'd be interested in the perspective. To see what it looks like from the outside would be an interesting thing to me. I've had some experience in that idea, that I grew up very ignorant of what it was to be a certain race and what it was to not be a certain color, rather than being something different, to not be something that people think is uniform. Like, I used to think everyone could sing. To find out not everyone could sing was a mystery to me. So it's the idea that someone goes, oh, well, I can do this and I can do that, but you can't do that. It's a strange feeling, and it gives a strange idea. So I personally would love to see something about black people and about racism, but from the perspective and from the gaze of a white person.
I think, yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's definitely the thing about that Dan was saying about making sure that people are in the room. But actually, yes, and one of the things that sometimes we say is, as writers, we can't just write ourselves time and time and time again. But if we are writing outside of ourselves, then it's our job to be able to do the research. And I would feel exactly the same about somebody who is straight writing a gay character, for example. There's all sorts of examples that we might give there. I think we've got one more kind of in-depth question and then two very quick fire ones. So I'll go for the in-depth one first. So somebody says, after studying so much race, I've been getting more emotional and sensitive. I literally almost cried at you guys' performance. How do I find a way to feel more confident to speak about my culture? I'm finding it hard to accept myself while exploring and entering the performance industry. I'm really worried about rejection of my skin color. Do you have anything? Can you respond to that?
So first of all, I think the biggest thing is you've got to really accept yourself. One of that I've learned is you've got to accept who you are and firmly ground yourself first of all. And then once you're firmly ground, things will be able to tilt you with sort of the wind, but just like a tree, like it's firmly rooted and the wind can blow and it moves layers, but it's still firmly rooted. And I think you've got to find that within yourself, and you've got to thoroughly find that thing that you enjoy about your own culture and then continue to enjoy it. So the thing that I absolutely love is and the feeling, and then once again the audience. So once you found that moment, continue to enjoy it, and that is your thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Dan. And we have still got questions coming in. I don't know, because we're finishing at 8. I don't know whether we'll have a chance to answer all of these, but there was one here. Somebody says they remember Bob Marley from the 1970s and the idea of the Bob Marley musical, which I think has just opened on the West End, and how that gives an experience of being at a Bob Marley concert. And it's an extraordinary experience that often happens when this person goes to watch black actors. Do you factor in drawing the audience into your work at the performance, at the writing stage? I'm guessing that's probably a question for Dan, but I guess also Reece, for you in terms of putting together the question, the recital. Sorry, looking at two things at once.
But we thought about it, didn't we? One of the biggest things with some of the gospel songs is they are repetitive, and if you even look at the final piece, it was over 2 pages, and there was just a repeat constantly going through. And that's what you do at church. You sing it again, and then come around again and they'll sing it again, and you just for 45 minutes and we sing it one more time. And that's what happens. And we wanted to do that, didn't we? We wanted to have printed on the back of the programs and have everyone join in, but it never quite worked out that way. But something we did factor in, and once again, it is something that I personally think about when I'm writing, is how is the audience going to feel this? But it's never something that I can prejudge. It's always in the moment. And just in the same way as when I'm playing for someone, if I don't stick strictly to the music, as Reece will know, and if act giving more and the audience is giving more, then you give a bit more. Or if the actor pulls back and the audience, you can feel that energy, then you pull back a little bit more. And that's the beauty of live theatre as well. So it's always more in the trials and how the audience react to it, and then you go, oh, I want to do this a little bit. And that's why I love with mine, I never strictly stick to music. I, just like a lot of black musicians, just do the improv and just feel it as I go along.
Thanks for that, Dan. So I've got one more question for both of you, and I'm gonna kind of put the two questions into one here. So, are there any musicals that you'd love to do but haven't had the chance yet? And also, are there any upcoming projects that you're involved in that people might be able to look out for?
Okay, so here I am. It's Rent, 5 Guys Named Mo, Hamilton. I would love to do In the Heights. Those are the ones I can name off my head right now. I'd love to do all sorts of other stuff. I'd hate to sit there and go, oh, well, I can't do this because I'm ethnic, or I can't do this because I'm ethnic. If I fit the character profile, you best believe that you're going to have to try and figure out a way to put me in this show. Because if I'm not in the show, what you're going to get is me upset, waiting at stage door, like, who are you? Why are you in the show? Why are you here? Because I'm better than you. And to answer the second part of the question, without sounding too conceited and pretentious, is not at the moment. I've settled down for the Christmas season, and actually I'm going to be doing some stuff at Lapland UK this Christmas season. So unless you've got kids, you won't see me, but you know, here's what it is.
There's a load. I would say there's a load of shows that I would absolutely love to do. There's some shows, so many, that I would love to just be part of, to be playing. I would love to play in something like Motown or Dreamgirls. That would be absolutely amazing. I would love to be able to do that. There is a show I'm currently, well, it's just in the works, it's just starting out, but I'd love to get it performed, but we'll see how it goes. But yeah, at the moment, just in early days. But it's very exciting. But I'm sure it's really given me the energy that I needed to get through, man. If that answers the question.
Absolutely. I think, Reece, I don't know if either of you have social media that people can follow at all, but do feel free to drop it in the chat while we wrap up here. But thank you so much. I mean, I cannot say how proud I am to be talking to Dan and Reece, both of whom are graduates of the University of Wolverhampton, but also just thoroughly nice people, and people that I'm so happy have stayed in touch with me after they've left as well. It's been a real privilege to speak to you both, and I hope it's been really useful to everybody that's watching. So I'm just going to say thank you again to Reece and Dan, and also thank you to Mike from, I've forgotten what they were called, we'll call them your external events, even though that's not what you had called it earlier. But thank you so much for Mike for supporting with that, and for Claire for supporting with Arts Fest as well. Next week, we've got Sajal Keshwala coming to talk to us about South Asian representation in musical theatre. Sajal's just finished playing Ray in the West End production of Everybody's Talking About Jamie, and that'll be again here at 7 o'clock, and it's being advertised through Eventbrite, so please do get your tickets. But thanks again to Dan and Reece, and thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.
Oh, just before we go, I'll just reel off the 3 books that I haven't mentioned. So there's What Can White People Do Next? Great book to read, and I haven't even got to finish most of these books. Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting in the Cafeteria Together? I actually got to watch the live stream from Birmingham City University about the author who did a talking about the book, and it was phenomenal. And then Natives, Black Race in the Ruins of an Empire. I haven't even got to dive into this book yet, but I tell you what, there is endless reams of material out there if you're willing to look for it, and what you want to do is listen and find out.
Thanks, Reece. If you want to send that through to me, then I'll make sure everyone gets that afterwards. But thank you again. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Reece. And thanks, everybody else. Take care. Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.